I'm so proud of beating lumber, beating lumber, beating lumber. I'm so proud of beating lumber, beating lumber, beating lumber. I'm so proud of beating lumber, beating lumber, beating lumber. I'm so proud of beating lumber, beating lumber, beating lumber. I'm so proud of beating lumber, proud of beating lumber. What don't you say to me? Say time and time again, I feel God.
Okay, everyone, so welcome to the Race Exchange. This is the second session that I've held, and thank you guys for joining me today. The topic is the race card and the idea of like exploitation or like self-defense. And as I've kind of said, I will be steering these conversations, and I'm going to lead in with a couple of my own personal examples or stories, and then I'll kind of open it up for people to just say, either respond to what I've said or bring their own situations into the mix, whether that's having the race card dealt to them, you know, because that can happen, and don't feel ashamed about it because people can exploit it at the same time, or vice versa. Right, so I think before we go into the stories, we'll just do a quick introduction around the room. I will do it based on who's first on my screen. So I've got top left, Jamie, if you don't mind introducing yourself, who you are, why you're here, any kind of background information you feel happy sharing.
Yeah, so I'm Jamie. I'm a Manchester-based musician, which is how I know Yemi. A lot of the music I play is either influenced by sort of jazz artists, funk, soul, Afrobeat, and therefore I guess could broadly be understood to be of Black origin primarily. And nearly all the people I play that music with in general are white, and most of the people in the music education institutions that teach that and learn that are still white. So there's this interesting sort of disconnect in some way. People have to be quite proactive about reminding themselves of it, I think. But the main reason I'm here is I've always struggled somewhat with social media as a platform for actual discussion. I'm much better at just using it for a shop window. So when Yemi kind of offered a space so people can actually come and talk about things in a more sort of calm and nuanced way, then I was very keen to get involved. So thanks for coming up with the idea.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Next, I've got Sam on my screen. Would you like to introduce yourself, Sam? You can unmute yourself, I think, if you like. Have I got the power?
Hi, done it.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sam. I am a northern white man from Bradford, and so you could make preconceptions as to views that I have held growing up, and they would be right up to a point, you know, like you arrive at a point at which you meet people and you begin to have discourse with people about subjects like race and stuff like that. And so I've spent the past kind of 10 years, 15 years of my life trying my absolute hardest to change some very deep held beliefs that I had that I'm not afraid to say I am ashamed of today, with regards to discussions about race and stuff like that. And so I've never really discussed it. So I want to have discussion with people, and I want to, you know, I want to learn, you know, and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm from the kind of town that would have flown a White Lives Matter banner over a football match, you know. So, but obviously, I'm not like, that's not who I am today. Very much not who I am today. But I just feel like I've never really had a chance to have any discourse about this kind of stuff. So I'd like to have some discourse.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for your openness and your honesty, first of all. So next is Cafe Shay. Have I said that right?
Yeah, I'm Kafeshe. I'm 18. I'm a Black woman. My family and my parents are from Trinidad in the Caribbean. I live in Hertfordshire. It's like 10 minutes north of London, but it's a little like suburban, like countryside county, I guess. And I guess the reason why I'm here is because because the area I live in is like quite white, I tend to seek out people who are like me, so other Black women. And I feel like I sometimes become quite entrenched in my way of seeing things. So I like to listen to other people's views and like understand different standpoints, just because I don't think it's right to go around the world like only believing your opinion or only understanding your opinion. I think it's good to reflect on other people's views as well.
Yeah, that's exactly why we're all here, I think. Thank you. Next is editor.
Hello everyone, so I'm editor. I'm one of Yemi's close friends. We met at uni. We came to Manchester at the same time 11 years ago. My background is, I'm Polish. I'm from Poland originally, and I moved to the UK when I was 15, and I lived in Chester. So, you know, as you, Sam, kind of said, you can make some assumptions based on that. You probably can. I mean, I personally never really shared any racist views, but I certainly was surrounded by racism in Poland and Chester, and I was definitely surrounded by lack of diversity. But from the moment I came to Manchester 11 years ago, I got to experience a lot of different cultures, and I was friends with so many people, different people, and that's where my education process started. And I'd like to say from that, you know, I'd like to say, as long as I can remember, I tried to be anti-racist, but the last few weeks have really made me kind of understand what being anti-racist means. And the biggest thing of that is education. And that's the biggest thing I'm excited about these conversations, is just learning more. And what it is for me is learning, because I argue with people about this, but I'm also quite an emotional person. And I feel like the more I know, the more I'll have good stuff to say, basically, just like ready-made sentences. I can just be like, even if somebody says something really upsetting, because it's actually something that happened to me personally after the protest. A man was racist on the bus because he saw my sign. And I was just like emotionally exhausted at this stage. So I kind of like froze, and I kind of said some all right stuff, but you know, where you kind of look back on it and think, oh, I could have said this, I could have said this. And this, I really want to learn loads more, just about the reality, the history, how much of the history is being dumbed down, and, you know, different experiences. I just want to keep growing so that I can kind of help, because I think it's like my duty to help. Because I do, even though I'm foreign and I've experienced racism myself, it's not the same because I'm white. So that's why I'm here. Hi, Levi.
Thank you, editor. And yes, yeah, Levi, just in time to introduce yourself. I think you're frozen a little bit. I don't know if you're resetting yourself up or something there, but we're just doing the introduction. Everyone's telling the group like who they are, any kind of background information, and kind of why they've joined. So if we have, just give them a few seconds to set it up. As soon as we've done these introductions, I'm going to start with my first confessional. And I guess I can explain that a little bit more, actually. The idea of a confessional is that, like, these are kind of things that I've not necessarily been able to share in the past, or that I've just like suppressed. But I'm happy to share and feel more comfortable sharing now, because I feel like they will actually give other people opportunities to realise certain things. So yeah, that's the idea of a confessional, but also it's just like private thoughts. And yeah, that's why I kind of labelled it that way. Levi, are you in a position to introduce yourself, or do you want me to just kind of move on and we can come back to you?
No, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, people know me as Levi, but
the connection's quite bad. Let's give him a moment.
be a DJ and I'm a producer well. So yeah, that's all.
Would you be able to repeat that? Just we lost quite a bit of you.
Okay.
Try it again.
I'll try and connect through my phone.
Okay. It might be easier to, even though we prefer to see you, if you switch off some of your video, it might improve the connection. See if it's how it's like now. Okay, it's not much better, I don't think. But we'll give
Okay, I'll go out and then I'll go into my phone.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, don't worry about it. Thank you. We'll crack on. I will kind of say a bit more about maybe one of my stories, and I'll get Levi up to speed once everyone starts sharing. So the race card, funny one, isn't it? It's like.
Yemi, shall I just say hello?
Sorry. Oh gosh, Sarah, I missed you out. Oh gosh, sorry, I completely.
Don't worry, I'll just be quick. I'm Sarah. I just got to say hi.
Thanks, Sarah.
I'm Sarah. I work with Yemi at Z Arts. I've worked in audience development and stuff for arts organisations for a fair while, so I've worked with a lot of different communities, and I've got a strong personal interest in anti-racism, also feminism and that kind of thing. So yeah, just a quick one. Sorry, Yemi, I just want to say hi quickly.
No, it's just because I got a bit distracted by the connection thing. I've completely forgotten who has introduced themselves yet. So sorry about that. But okay, so I'm going to start and I'm going to tell you like one of my own stories, and then we'll kind of see what response that gets and go from there. I've got a couple under my belt, which is a strange thing to say. I've got a couple under my belt that I can share. However, I'm very open to this being an open conversation, and I'm not just speaking. So we'll see what the first bit kind of brings to the table. So one of my earliest memories of like kind of the race card used, I guess, is when I was in secondary school. So after I moved from London, I went to a predominantly white school in the suburbs of Bedfordshire, and obviously, you know, that comes with certain things where you kind of make certain changes, or you kind of assimilate yourself with certain people to be a certain way, or like I've been accused of like losing my blackness or whatever. So I was going through this kind of phase in like year 9, maybe year 10, and a group of kind of black people from actually a different school, because there weren't that many black people in the school that I was at, and being told in like social circles, we were out in parks and stuff like that, saying like that girl's racist, like having kind of in a strange way like the reverse thing happened to me, being like, she's racist, why is she not hanging around with us? And that's the kind of comments that I used to get, which is like extremely confusing, because you're just like, part of you is just like, I'm just trying to fit in. I'm basically trying not to get bullied because I am already different, yet I am being told that I am. And the race card got kind of used, maybe because they wanted me to feel more in a line, you know, in retrospect, I could kind of look back and think, the only reason they would say that would be because they probably makes them feel sad to see other people not integrating. They might have had their own reasons for saying it. Maybe they just weren't very nice people, you know. But it was a very big moment for me of kind of accepting or realizing that, I'm doing something wrong here by hanging around with predominantly white people, or am I, or questioning myself. And I think that's kind of a big thing that a lot of people, especially if you're growing up in England and if you don't grow up in a city originally. So when I moved from London was like multicultural. You know, there was a couple of Yemis in my year. It was very, very, very mixed. And then obviously when your parents try to perhaps improve their life in a way that is seen as better, so become a bit more aspiring middle class, you end up in that kind of situation. So it's always kind of bothered me. It's always kind of like been in the back of my head about being told that I'm not black enough. And I wondered if there was anyone who had kind of like any experience of that. I mean, I don't want to go as far as to say that you've told someone that they're not black enough, or vice versa. There are certain examples where people maybe hang around predominantly with black people and they're white. And people might pull them up on that and say, oh, why are you hanging around with those black people? And I just wonder if there's kind of any any shared instances of anyone who's non-white, so any kind of background, ethnic. If anyone wants to share.
Yeah, can I come in, Yemi?
Yes, please. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's so difficult because I grew up in South Africa, and obviously there was apartheid there at the time, but what you are saying, being called not black enough, because I'm very light skinned, in the township I was called an albino.
Mm.
So people I grew up with, because I didn't have that dark, so like a skin like yours, basically, yeah, you know, because I'm quite light skinned. And when I was younger, I was much more light skinned, and I was called an albino. And when I moved to the UK, a lot of my friends in South Africa via Facebook, because most of my friends in the UK were white and are still white, you know. My girlfriend is white, my mentor is white, my boss is white, because we live in a demographic and it's just numbers. But, you know, I had a lot of heat on Facebook and Twitter to say I wasn't black enough, I was selling out, I admire the oppressor, and I'm trying by all means to be better than other black people because, you know, all my friends are white and I live in a white country and stuff. So yeah, that's my experience of that. It's quite a difficult thing.
Has anyone kind of heard much of that or experienced or seen much of that happening to, like, in their own personal circles? Faye, yeah?
Yeah, I think I would definitely say I experienced a lot being called like not black enough, especially growing up in a predominantly white area. So like all of my friends were white growing up, and like I speak basically the same as like where I'm growing up, and it doesn't sound very black, and like I like to study and just all these things which for some reason just didn't make me black enough according to some people who I met like later on. And I remember like because actually only like 3 months ago, actually no, not 3 months ago, just before lockdown, I went on a date with this guy, a black guy, and like I just met him and he was like, "You're really white for a black girl." And it was like, that was so recent. I didn't really think that people did that a lot now. I thought that was like a kid thing, like a secondary school thing. I don't think people still did it.
It's strange, isn't it? Because you just kind of think, what do? You know, like you're not trying to be anyone but a human person living, yet because racism still exists, you are kind of caught up in these moments where like you have to question if you're being good enough, which is strange. It's not very nice, of course, to kind of feel that way. Has anyone got anything else to kind of share on that kind of topic? Sam, I saw Sam first and then Editor.
So in my school we didn't have any black people in my school, but we had Asian guys in our school, and one of my best friends was a Syrian guy called Mahmood, and he used to get called coconut on Bounty by the other Asian lads in our year because he would, I mean, he was my best mate, and like he'd always hang out with us, you know what I mean? And so he'd always get called Bounty by the other lads. It was just a really weird thing. And then I guess that's like fueling the way that the people in my group of friends viewed the other guys, because he was white on the inside, he was all right and they weren't. Do you know what I mean? It was always a really weird dynamic between him and the other lads in the year who were like that, not like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing. It was always like a really weird thing how someone who is BAME, a BAME person of colour, can be ostracised by other people of colour for the people that he hangs out with, or the clothes that he wears, or the music that he listens to, and stuff like that. I always found that to be a really weird kind of thing in our school, and it was very prevalent throughout Bradford. Was that, you know, it was very much a kind of us and them type affair. You know, I don't know. It always struck me as being very odd that my mate, that someone could be a different colour underneath when we're all obviously all the same colour underneath and stuff, you know.
Yeah. Do you recall anything? I mean, I think I'd like to come back to this in a second. Actually, I'll give editor a chance. But do you recall saying anything back in the situations, or hearing that and just kind of cracking on and just head down and just? I mean, what kind of responses would there be to that? If you remember?
I guess we all kind of laughed along with it, because that was just the way. I don't know. That was just what you did. I mean, you know, this is the same school, the same guy. Got called a terrorist by another guy in our year, and he punched him and broke his nose, and he got a detention, and the guy whose nose he broke just nothing happened to him, you know. But like, that was like a very, I don't know, that was just obviously now I see it was, you know, it's wrong, but it was an all boys grammar school in North Yorkshire, so it was very much a kind of, I don't know, almost a very entrenched system of education that wasn't helped by the people who were in charge.
Yeah, great, thanks, Sam. We'll come back to some of that. Editor, what did you have to say on there?
Thanks, Yemi. And yeah, just a really quick one on what Sam said there. Like, I went to a school in Chester, and I always argued with everyone, but we had teachers saying racist stuff about whether they were black people, whether they were Polish kids. So, you know, we kind of like, right now we find it so much more shocking. At the time it was still wrong, and like I said, I argued with it, but it is nice to see that at least in that 13 years since I've been in high school, you know, there are things that are just so much more outrageous to hear about. But specifically, where I put my hands up about the subject that you were talking about, well, first of all, it really kind of like hurts to hear your experiences, because it's like, you know, being told that, it doesn't sound nice at all. And I can only relate to it to a certain extent, but I can, because I'm from a different country and I don't hide being Polish because I have to. It's just a matter that I became a bit English because I just live here, and you know, I've lost my accent, and I don't you know, dance the traditional Polish dance, and I don't cook Polish food every night. It's just because I'm surrounded by other things. So even like, additionally to the racism thing, it is quite difficult to be either of the things. You know, I'm not Polish, I'm not English, I'm somewhere in between, and I'm sure it's similar for a lot of, you know, you guys who spoke, I'm not sure if it is, but it's kind of like hard enough being that as it is, so you don't need somebody else telling you anything about it. It's such a personal thing, and nobody knows somebody else's experience. You know, whoever called you not black enough, or you not black enough, all three of you said that you have been called not black enough before. All of those people knew absolutely nothing about you, and it's just really interesting to hear that that's something that you had to put up with.
Probably more common than we really realise. Thank you, editor. Cyrus got a hand up there, I think.
Yeah, I just think that it's a very similar thing, really. So in terms of being called a coconut, or sort of referred to as not Asian enough because you have different interests to people. So my interests are very much the arts. So I sort of have been told a number of times, oh, that's not what we do. Like, you know, you do all of your, I think I've been told you do all of your white person nonsense a lot of the time. So it's really difficult. And I think also working within the arts and having sort of done the degrees that I've done, they tend not to have a high representation of people who aren't white. So you do end up making more friends who are white. And that sort of, you know, you broaden out your friendship groups and you try and talk to more people and stuff like that. But when you're sort of like put with all those people and those are the people who share your interests, that sort of becomes a self-fulfilling sort of thing. So like the majority of my close friends, not all of them, but a lot of them are white, because, you know, we've grown up together and we've had a shared interest. The weird thing about that though is that I'm from, it was really weird. I only moved to Manchester last year. And the area I'm in now, sort of Old Trafford, is really what I would call like properly diverse. Like that, as in there's loads of different ethnicities, loads of different backgrounds around here. Where I grew up is in inner city Birmingham, and it is literally, I'm not even exaggerating, 95% Asian, maybe higher. Like it was an event if you saw someone white walking down our street, as in it would be like, where do they live? I've never seen them before, that kind of thing. And it's just sort of like going from that, and sort of like a primary school that was like 95% Asian, and a secondary school that was like 80% Asian, and like literally there were maybe 3 or 4 white girls in our year, going to like university where it's predominantly white is a massive culture shock. But also my family don't speak with the accent that I have. We sort of never used to speak English at home very much, so I think that my accent is similar to my nursery school teachers, who's a very southern, very posh sounding lady. So I have a lot of people thinking that I'm like super posh when I'm not. And again, that sort of ties into sort of like, oh, you want to be white, you sound like that, you don't sound anything like us, when it's not something that was conscious at all.
Yeah, I'm just like picking up, I was writing a couple of notes, and like a couple of things that seem to be this on this topic, like the identity and the hybrid identity thing, where you can't be, you have to be one or the other. You can't be a mixture of, and you know, how can we start to think about ways that people need to just stop thinking in that way and stop asking those questions, making those statements? What kind of things can we or should we be saying back to people to make them I don't know, just made them realize that they are creating, that they're already, before I've even had a chance to defend myself, they've said this is who I am and what I'm doing, and that it's wrong, or implied that it's wrong. So, and there's an issue of integration, I think, obviously what Said said about the representation in the arts. There is an issue of integration there, and I won't go into this too deep because it's going to be one of my next sessions, but the this is a white country debate is a very interesting one on this level, because then it's kind of the one where people are like, well, what do you expect? You're in England. But then we know it goes a lot further than that, education wise and history wise and stuff like that. But there is an issue where, like, nursery, if you're picking up from your nursery school teacher something that like you don't do at home, why is there not better integration, or should there be, or are there ways that education systems, schools should be supporting that as an active thing that they try to do? Yeah, I don't know, I think that that's kind of where we've got to in terms of what we've been sharing. Did anyone have anything else they wanted to say around that at all? Levi? Oh, sorry, you have to, I will unmute you 1 moment. I think I can unmute you. I have a power.
Yeah, you unmuted me. Okay, thank you. I think I've noticed that there isn't actually a very discernible sort of curriculum in English schools that either teach about the awareness of the UK's colonial past, or the UK's imperialist past. There isn't any sort of indication. I know this because I have emailed during this time. I have emailed the Department of Education just to find out what are the sort of history lessons that are there at the moment, and there isn't any education. So I think that should be the beginning point, where children are taught the entirety of the history of where they are, and how where they are has affected where other people come from, because we cannot hide away from the UK's colonial past. But that is at an elementary level. I think what we've been talking about is a much more advanced sort of level of discrimination, particularly when we're talking about whether you white, whether you're black enough, or all sorts of those things. And I liked, I don't know if it's you, Yemi, that mentioned the word integration, because that's very important. I mean, the reason why I'm the way that I am is because I'm a complete product of Manchester for 16 years, and I've fully integrated with the natives. But you find that people who come from my country in South Africa, some of them have been in this country for so long. And I suppose I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of Asian people, because, there's a danger of trying to generalize people's experiences. So I'll speak to South Africans specifically. There's a big community of South Africans that just continue to follow the music scene in the country in South Africa. They continue to live the cultural practices here in the UK of South Africa. So they continue to have, we call it a braai, the barbecues. They continue to listen to the same music. They only hang around amongst themselves and stuff. And it was my father, my late father, that always taught me to engage people where I am, irrespective of their color or their orientation or how they live. So I think that is a major problem. And I'm actually at a loss as how do you teach that? How do you educate people about the importance of integration? Because I would like to be part of that movement, because I've integrated so much into Western world. It's not like I've lost myself. I've engaged with people and understood people's feelings, understood people's music taste, stayed with people, became friends with people, go to places like Spain to DJ, or Copenhagen, learn different cultures. I feel that my mind is so wide open, and I think people from my country would certainly benefit from that. And I think if that happened, they wouldn't be reverting to things like you are not, black enough and stuff. If they really understood the benefits of interaction and integration, but I am at a loss here to say how we teach that. When we talk elementary racism, that's fine. We can put it in school curriculums and stuff, but I think what we're talking about is a much higher level of self-discrimination, actually. And I'm at a loss as to how. I wish somebody on this forum probably has a better idea. I'm at a loss as to how we teach people about that.
Well, I think, thank you so much for that, because that's given me quite a lot in terms of I don't know. I think the next question I was going to ask, which I think feeds into this, is why, in emotional reasons, but why do people feel like they have to use that then? In that case, like, to kind of get to the crux of it, like, why do you feel people have to say, you're being like this? Like, what kind of reasons do we imagine people might do that for? Sam?
It's to fit in, isn't it? It's like, safety in numbers. So, like, as Sarah was saying, and Levi, I think in terms of parts of South Africa, and certainly Birmingham and Bradford definitely share a lot of common ground in terms of there's very much, they're very, well, I mean, I guess not so much anymore, but like when I grew up, I came to Manchester in 2005. So before that, like, there was a lot of segregation, and it was very much a kind of, you've got to fit in and be like the people who you hang out with. So because it's rather than celebrating the diversity of a group of individuals within the diversity of the individuals within a group, it was very much a kind of, you've got to fit into this paradigm that was created for us by our whatever situation that we've arrived in, and if you don't fit into that, then what's wrong with you?
Mm-hmm.
Like when you were at secondary school, you'd get them saying, you're not black enough because you've got this kind of, it's a tribal thing, isn't it? Especially in school, like a desperation to fit in, or a desperation to, or not a desperation, but like, you know, a feeling of what's appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Sam. Jamie had his hand up there.
Yeah, I was more of a question really, because
Mhm.
interestingly, I grew up in Hertfordshire as well, and my auntie lives in like rural Bedfordshire, and I kind of know exactly the society that the two of you are talking about, and but needless to say, from a very different perspective. You know, there were a few black people at my school, there are a few sort of British Asian people at my school, but very white area. I grew up in a sort of, I guess, like lefty, but middle England lefty area. So I was always sort of pushed towards looking further into history and things like that. But was that because of any sense of the desire to understand wider society, or was that because I grew up in a house that would put BBC Four on at 9 p.m. and that might happen to be the documentary that's on? You know, I have to be really realistic about how I happened upon that information. But I'm just curious as to these experiences that you've had about kind of being told that you're not filling your identity sufficiently by other people effectively. To what extent do you think that, especially at the kind of school age, do you think you being told that is actually a reflection of their sense of unease with themselves based on the society that they're living in, which is like predominantly white? Do you think them telling you that you're not black enough might be belying how they feel about the environment they're in when they're like 15 and incredibly self-conscious? And
Yes, I think that's a definite point. This is where things get really complex, because you're kind of like, well, the only reason someone's calling me out on something is because they then don't feel comfortable themselves with something. And that goes back to something else. So why aren't these African, Asian, diaspora communities not feeling like they can also, for want of a better word, be, you know, I don't know, not that you want to be a coconut, or, you know, but do you know what I mean? Like, why do they not feel that they could be more integrated, I guess, is probably the better way of saying it. And also, integration doesn't necessarily mean denying who you are, it's just having this kind of hybrid. So yeah, I think that comes down to, I don't want to go as far as to be like hostile environment, but those aspects of things like hostile environment create these like defense situations, and then it becomes a powers that be issue. But then it's like, well, in that case, obviously we can't tackle the powers that be issue at the moment, which is why we're just having conversations. But do we feel like, I feel like just from the last half an hour, I've already got my response to anyone who would dare try and suggest anything like that to me nowadays, and be like, look, I'm just trying to integrate this. I'm trying to, you know, and that's probably what I would have loved to have said when I was 15, but definitely didn't have the mind frame for that. But you know, this has already kind of come up with reasons why people can call, ways that people can call out each other's just pure not being comfortable with themselves or their community, whatever. Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I think that's a really interesting point. I did have I had Syra on next to say something, and then Levi.
So I just thought that it was interesting where people are talking about sort of your identity and, you know, sort of being the right type of ethnic minority. And I think personally, I think that there is a thing within society where we see whiteness as the default. So you can be whatever you want if you're white. Oh, you're interested in that thing? Okay, that's fine. That because you're just a blank slate. Whereas people ascribe, even within ourselves, and in terms of like internalized racism, we ascribe being a certain way to ethnic minorities because we don't see them as the same sort of blank slates as we see sort of the white majority. So I do think that it's rooted in that idea around internalized racism and white supremacy. But I also think that some of it is born out of stereotypes, and some of those stereotypes are based in truth. I know with Asian friends and stuff, we'll always make jokes about, you know, oh, it's typical like Asian thing, and that kind of thing as well. So I don't think that's as insidious, but I definitely think that you have more scope to sort of be an individual if you're white in that context, rather than sort of like representing your race.
And that's strange, isn't it? Because it's almost like the privilege goes beyond the physical and the material. The privilege just goes on like people allowing you to be more than just white without question. And whereas vice versa, it's like you can't just be more than just Black, Asian, or otherwise. Absolutely, thank you, Sarah. Levi, what were you gonna say? Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
I forget all the time. Who was the gentleman that spoke before Sarah?
Jamie, I believe. Yeah.
Jamie. So this is very important. I'm very glad that when I spoke about my point before, I was very honest with everyone to say that I'm at a loss as to how we can make people perhaps understand the concept of integration. But what Jamie said, which is why these conversations are very important, and it doesn't matter who they come from. Like there's a misnotion in the world of saying, white people can't contribute into conversations about racism and stuff. But this is absolute proof that that's not true, because I have now started to think something because of what Jamie said. Jamie spoke about his background and spoke about that he was from a lefty kind of background, and his quest generally was to research and find out about history and find out about what had happened in the past in terms of where he's from. So my thinking from there, which is why I immediately raised my hand, is that there are a lot of people like Jamie, and what that tells me is his parents were most probably, if he's saying left, his parents were most probably aware of quite a lot of things in terms of the injustices that have happened in the world, and they probably told themselves that they're going to try and live a life of truth and pass it on to their children. So when I said I'm at a loss as to how we can go around the issue of understanding integration, particularly amongst ourselves, the ethnic minorities, is perhaps the education needs to leave the school and be targeted towards parents of the generation that is coming. And perhaps we will have inquisitive and open minds like Jamie that would, because I think sometimes trying to achieve something at a global level and at a mass level, it takes time because there are a lot of obstacles. But what Jamie's saying as an individual growing up, if we have more of those people through educating parents and stuff, we will have a good mushroom of people that actually understand these things. And not just jumping on the fanfare or the bandwagon of saying, oh, okay, racism is topical. No, Jamie is not starting to think about what has happened in the past because of the BLM movement or what we are going through now. It's because of his parents that he's learned a long time ago to research what the truth was that governs these things. So thank you to Jamie.
Oh, thank you, Levi. That's really excellent. Lovely point. I'm going to try and stick to the order, and Edit was first, and then Jamie, we're going to maybe respond. Is that right, Editor? Yeah.
Can I just before I make my point, I've got a point to make. Can I just clarify that when we're talking about integration, we are talking two-sided, right? Because obviously we spoke a little bit about integration where Levi spoke about other people from South Africa not willing to be integrated into the rest of the UK, but also vice versa. We are talking about both sides here, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so when we're kind of like picking our brains, thinking about how we can do this, and everything you just said, I think is just so spot on. Based on Jamie's experiences, etc. Just that early education kind of thing. And I've seen a lot of petitions with regards to changing the school curriculum, but I think integration and anti-racism is just something that is going to grow as like a double-sided platform. Integration is going to be really difficult to organise when racism is still more rife. So I think as we go more anti-racist, then when we go more anti-racist, I think integration is something that's going to be a lot more easy, and I think it's something that will happen a lot more naturally, because the resistance to integration comes from somewhere. It's not just like laziness or whatever. It is because of not being treated very nice in some places.
Thank you, editor. So we've got Jamie, Kafeshe, and then Nongi. We've still got enough time, so everyone please do share.
I'll be really quick. I'm quite keen to, as grateful as I am to Levi, I'm quite keen to admonish the idea that I haven't still got an awful lot of work to do. I think this notion of education is really interesting, because I was very lucky that I grew up in a house, and not just in terms of like history and like empirical history or anything like that. I just grew up in a house where like a general level of curiosity was always quite encouraged, and that's sort of where I ended up taking that encouragement. But I think what has been really interesting in the last few weeks is this discussion about education as a whole, and I think schools need to do more. I think what's been quite nice about this conversation is so far it hasn't been that political, but I think it's no huge secret that Gove has kind of whitewashed the history curriculum to an even greater extent than it was before. And there does need to be much more work done at a school level. That said, by the time you're hitting like university and you're moving to these big cities, if you're studying jazz music, it's not actually enough to blame the institution for not providing you with the historical context for that music. It's a shortcoming of the institution for sure, but if you're studying that music, you are obliged to also have the self-motivation to see where that's come from. Why did Coltrane release a tune called Alabama in 1963? You should have that curiosity to join those dots yourself. And I think there's been a lot of people, not unfairly, admonishing the educational institutions, but you need to make sure that that's not as a shortcut for you having that desire to do the work yourself as well. And that's not to say I'm perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I think I have found that a little frustrating, that people have just been like hammering the uni rather than kind of looking at whether they maybe could have done there's that big library in the middle of town, like.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Thank you, Jamie. That's a really good point. And thank you everyone so far. Kafeshe, you want to share?
Yeah, I was gonna say, in terms of the integration going both ways, I think I do see that the education system is a really big part of preventing that from happening well. But I would say, in my opinion, I feel like integration in a way is the first step towards building an anti-racist society. And I think not just teaching history, and us individually, not just learning about history of Britain and different countries as well. I think it's important to see people who have been in loads of different fields from different backgrounds to kind of present the idea that say a certain subject or something is not just for one race. If we have more popular representation of different people from different backgrounds in different fields, then I feel like it's easier for us to integrate both ways. And then in terms of people educating themselves and not necessarily relying on the schools, I think also it's quite difficult to find resources a lot of the time. I know I research a lot, but it's hard to find the details out there. And even documentaries and TV shows that the channels have put on recently now, they're usually at 9, 10, 11 o'clock, so kids can't watch it at that time, and they can't teach themselves from a young age, and it's just hard to access in general, which I think is a really big issue. And it's something that could be easily fixed by just putting it in the middle of the day so people can watch it, or having better access to books and stuff.
Absolutely, programming is a huge issue in terms of representation of all different types of marginalized groups, sex, gender, different races. We we need to have just more mixed and integrated programs so that our day-to-day life is hit constantly with all these different things, because we have that anyway, but it's always from one particular perspective. So yeah, thank you very much for that. Sam, I think you put your hand up next.
Yeah, I think that the most difficult thing about integration is, I mean, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I did a PGCE myself, and so I've worked with a lot of teachers, and I wouldn't say that teachers themselves are particularly pushing a racist agenda. I think the curriculum, yeah, fine, absolutely, but it's the outside of schools, the unprotected places. So my nephew is 18, and he's recently started working on a building site, and he's started coming out with some pretty horrendous, pretty nasty stuff, right? He started saying, you know, I've told him off a lot for it, and I think both my brothers are making a real effort, but it's the moments where he finds someone who he regards as a role model who shouldn't be a role model to him, and shouldn't be the person from whom he gets his opinions about race and diversity, because, you know, if you get told for 40 hours a week that they came over here and took our jobs, that kind, you know, it's that kind of rhetoric that he's faced with every day. And so I think that's where the real issue is. I mean, the issue is obviously in schools. It is in education. It is in that kind of thing. But then it's also in how do you, because you're never going to be able to guard against people like that. You're never going to be able to, you know, there'll always be one moment at which someone can put an idea in someone's head and it's there then. So it's about educating whether or not the views that you're getting exposed to are right or wrong. Do you know what I mean?
For making that decision, absolutely. Well, so we're coming up to about 5 minutes or so until we end. So I'd like to give everyone the chance to give like a final contribution or hot take or whatever it is. And I know Jamie and Edit have their hands up. And in the meantime, if anyone else who hasn't spoken recently would like to add something to wrap it up, then please do. If what I'm thinking a lot with these sessions, the last one kind of ended when it kind of got to that really core point when we were like, well, we're getting somewhere. And what I'm thinking of doing is doing part 2s of these sessions, when I've done everyone, and then get the same people from who did the last discussion maybe to continue the discussion, but we'll see how it goes. But for now, to kind of stick to the hour, we'll just get Jamie and Editor and then anyone else who wants to share. And thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, I was going to raise a question, but maybe I won't do that, because if we do this again, maybe that's the right thing. And I'd love to, by the way.
Write it down or anything,
I've had a really good time listening to everyone. And I think that's really interesting what Sam's saying. And perhaps this is something that would spill over into another conversation, but is it the case that and I'm kind of playing devil's advocate, which is a horrible thing to do. Is it an extent there are some people that, despite how eloquently anti-racist you try to be, there are some people in that building site, would you kind of have to go, you're too far gone, and start with the school system as a trickle down? Or do you think, like, under no circumstances would there be people that you kind of think, okay, this is going to be a long process and some people are sort of beyond help? And that's not saying that's what I think, but what would people say to that? Are there some people that you just kind of go, this will change, that person is probably not going to change, let's focus on the people that might? Or do you just kind of, or do we just kind of try and
I understand
the battle with everyone?
I understand what you're saying. I did see something today that really challenged that, because I saw the story of a guy who had a Nazi tattoo on his thingy, and he had recently got that covered up because he had changed. And I think ultimately, as difficult as it might be to see, the reality is, if we start to become more insidious ourselves with our anti-racist agenda, it will grow out of culture, or out of, you know, I think everything's got a possibility, but no, I think you're absolutely right. That's probably where I find myself most of the time, not addressing race, because I'm like, well, but then I started to realize, wait, am I just going to accept that this is always going to be a thing? Do I want to just live the next potentially 60 years with that in my mind? And I've just decided that no, that's just not okay. So thank you, Jamie, for that kind of final thought. Sarah, I think, sorry, I kind of lost track a little bit there. Sarah, maybe.
Editor doesn't want to go. Okay.
I'll go after you.
Okay. All right. Just a few thoughts. So I understand what people are saying about the stuff about the more obvious sort of racism and trying to teach anti-racism in schools and stuff, but I do think that within schools, even with the best sort of intentions, because people have unconscious biases, that there are quite a lot of microaggressions within how perhaps teachers treat students and deal with stuff that they don't have cultural knowledge about. The thing that comes to mind from my own school experience is where the black girl's hair, and that kind of thing, where it's treated as not professional, or that's not appropriate for school, even though they might be wearing it in protective styles and stuff. And I'll admit I didn't know that at the time. It's something that I found out more about now. Or certain ways of dressing, or certain cultural assumptions made about people. And I just think that it's, you know, it's sometimes easy to look at the big stuff, but just looking at that smaller stuff on a smaller scale, where you sort of make those assumptions about people. That was just it, really.
Thank you. No, great little point there. Thank you. Editor?
It's so difficult. I kind of want to comment on everything that I've just heard. Really quickly, about what you said, Sam. You were talking about your nephew who's kind of surrounded by this role model who kind of fell in that tribe. And you know, and I get that. You know, one example could be when I was in sixth form, I was sticking up for somebody who was getting bullied in the library, and this kid was year 7 and the girl was my age. But anyway, I stuck up for her, and this kid turns around to me, to a year 12, shut the F up, I pay your benefits, you immigrant. This kid doesn't even know what benefits are, and I had a job, and do you know what I mean? It's so ridiculous, but he's clearly just repeating something that his mum or dad have said, or uncle, or whatever. And yeah, obviously it is that kind of thing. You've got those role models that kind of shouldn't be, etc. And sometimes you get people that can't help it. But what I think should be taught a little bit in schools is that independent thinking. And that could be done by adding things into a curriculum that are a little bit kind of deeper than just being straight anti-racist, like you just said, Sarah. You know, for example, if, you know, that big, the book that got really popular, called Don't Touch My Hair, her name, I can't pronounce it, it's Wordley or something. You know, if that was part of the curriculum, just as compulsory reading, imagine the difference in terms of independent thinking that people would be able to do.
This in the library. I mean, do you even think it's in the library? No,
it probably isn't even in the library.
Yeah, I mean, we are facing this kind of like resurgence of having plateaued when it came to racism and discrimination, and now we're like reevaluating everything. Maybe in the last 20 years that we've started to accept. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to see, you know, September school starting again, and those kind of books and being in there, and all these.
Call me naive, but I think this is possible because we have so much momentum right now. Think about how much has changed already. Like tippling statues is a symbolism. It's a massive symbolism. I'm sorry, but when the Berlin Wall fell, that wasn't just about a bit of brick coming down. That was a big symbol for something that massive that happened in Europe, right? So I think we've got all this massive momentum right now, and as long as we all super commit to continue to educate ourselves and people who are educable. That was another thing I wanted to talk about. So you said, like, are there some people like beyond repair? So I kind of like make it like my mission to share what I've learned, because I'm really lucky that I've got so many friends that have taught me a lot. For example, you know, our friend Maggie, etc. And I have some ex-colleagues from when I was in the corporate world that I do consider beyond repair at the moment. I've had many arguments with them, and right now I feel like my energy is better spent elsewhere. However, I think the world is changing so rapidly that society is going to push these guys out, and it'll force them to either be outsiders or actually go, actually, my way of thinking maybe needs adjusting a little bit. I've seen a lot of case studies of, I saw some tweets. This woman said, oh, so apparently BLM is cancelling families now. I've been not invited to the last 2 family barbecues. So it's like, yeah, great. I'm sure they're having a great time without you. And if we keep doing this, then society will force us to kind of make those people beyond repair feel a little bit more uncomfortable and force them into changing their minds.
Thank you, Eda. Some really great points there. And obviously, we know this is being recorded, so it's going to be really interesting to kind of look back at this and look at the transcript and stuff before I get it all out, because I think we've touched upon some really, really amazing, it's not even revolutionary things, they're just like, these are potential answers and ways, and like quite a lot of different ways that things can change. And I think I'm kind of leaving this conversation a bit of a hopeful spin. I don't know I think maybe Levi had something to say, but if that was going to be the final thing, I was hoping I'd maybe get a word. Has everyone got the chat functionality on their Zoom? I'd like to get maybe like a word that you kind of feel having had this conversation. You can either say it or write it in the chat, and I'm just going to use that as kind of word clouds that I'll create around these conversations, just to kind of see the feelings and emotions that people feel after having these kind of talks and these topics. So thank you so much. Levi with the final word, I think, and if everyone wants to think about their one word to share.
Just one sentence or 2 sentences. I'm very grateful I joined, and I'm very grateful for the people that have joined as well. We've been talking about education and talking about how we can educate people. This is exactly the way we can do it. I think this is amazing, Yemi, and I'll be speaking about this a lot if you don't mind. I think this has been incredible.
Thank you. Well, all right, this is just the start really, but we're trying to see how it goes. But every time, this is the second time I've done it, and I feel very enriched after doing it. So thank you everyone for joining, especially on a sunny evening. You've probably got a couple of hours left of sun if you want to go and catch it. Please write down a word if you can in the chat. If you don't think of it now, maybe send me a message later and with the word. But if not, then I think we'll call that a day. Okay. Goodbye, everyone.
I'm so proud of beating I'm so proud of beating